One reason why nonviolent movements are in general twice as successful as violent ones, it's that it can attract more people, and also more diverse people, like more women than the violent ones, elderly and professionals. Thank you so much. It's really great to be back at this conference. It's one of my favorite times of the year. Some of you might have heard that I was a bit sick this morning, but I do feel a lot better. But maybe not 100%, but please bear with me. I hope it goes okay anyway. In today's talk, I hope to share some of the lessons that we in the animal rights movement can pick up from other movements. Sometimes I feel really frustrated that we in our movement are not more successful. We have such a super strong case. We can end the suffering for billions of individuals, and we do have the tools to do it. And still, we as a humankind keep on exploiting and killing animals day after day. How many of you feel frustrated about that? Can I see? Yeah, I would guess it's all. And we do know that other movements throughout history has been successful in changing values, behaviors, and whole societies. And aren't we fools if we wouldn't try to learn from their successes? In this presentation, I've tried to pick out just a few examples from the anti-slavery, women's rights, the environmental, and the LGBTQ plus movements, which I believe we in the animal rights movement can learn from. But I found out that it's really tricky when you try to tease out the lessons. It's so easy to choose examples that fits your own theory of change, that fits your own values. Because our world and our history is so complex. So it's very hard to know what affected what. And I'm no exception. I also have my biases. So please think about that when you hear these examples. And I just also want to mention that when it comes to these movements, I will mention I'm in no way any expert on these. So please, if I have misunderstood something, tell me, and I really look forward to a good discussion after my presentation. And the movements I will mention, I sometimes describe as successful. But I also want to point out that in all of these issues that we're going to talk about, sure, they managed to win quite a lot of fights, but unfortunately there is still a lot of injustice and problems in these issues that I'm going to touch upon. So the first lesson comes from the anti-slavery movement in the United States and Great Britain in the 1700s and 1800s, and it's about the question of showing the oppression and freeing the oppressed. The slave owners, they promised that the slaves were well taken care of. In fact, they had better lives than most. That was, of course, not true at all. And this was something that the anti-slavery activists successfully exposed. One of the ways they showed this was to make posters of slave ships, like this one, which you can see here. This is a slave ship called the Brooks from Liverpool and used in the year of 1781. This was actually one, or maybe the actual first political poster ever made, designed specifically to change people's minds. In fact, many of the methods we use today comes from the anti-slavery movement in the US and Great Britain, methods we today take for granted. This was a TV commercial from the biggest dairy company in the north of Europe, I believe it is, Arla. It said something in Swedish like line up in the butter factory, portraying the cows as a sports team. These companies, they spend millions and millions to show animals in nice environments, sometimes with a whimsical twist like here. The animal industry tries to convince the public that the animals we eat are well taken care of, when the fact is, of course, something totally different. It's like the producer and the consumer have signed a silent agreement saying something like, we don't show these violent realities and you don't ask about them. And I believe that we in the animal rights movement have to override this by exposing the cruel reality of how animals are treated. Here is a photo I took earlier this week at the pig farm in Sweden. Now, some of you might say, but we already do that. We have many pictures and videos from factory farms and slaughterhouses. And that is, of course, all true. Today, it's not hard at all to find these documentations in, I think, most countries, if not all. The problem is that the industry spends so much on their propaganda to feed us daily. So we have to make sure that it's our pictures and videos that affect people. So it's not enough to just do it once or twice from one or two places. I think we need to go to local farms, local slaughterhouses, and do it often to be able to override this. To show that it's not only a few rotten apples, a few bad farms that, like the industry sometimes says, but the violence is in every part of the animal exploitation industry. The Underground Railroad was a system of routes and safe houses where former slaves were taken to escape their slave owners. The most famous of the activists within this system was the intrepid Harriet Tubman. Maybe you've heard about this amazing woman. It's estimated that around 1,000 slaves per year were rescued through the Underground Railroad. That was only a tiny drop compared to around 4 million slaves who were held captive every year in bondage. But this freeing of these slaves had a significant symbolic and psychological impact. It demonstrated resistance to slavery, and that gave hope among enslaved people and also helped to fuel the abolitionist movement. The freed slaves could also give powerful testimonies about the horrors of slavery. Frederick Douglass was one of the freed slaves, and when he came out, he became a prominent abolitionist. He wrote autobiographies and he held speeches that were instrumental in changing the public opinion on slavery. The rescue of animals we can only free a minuscule part of those animals held captive in the industry. But like freeing of slaves, that can still be important psychologically and symbolically. They show the difference between a life in captivity as production machines and life in a home where they're loved and well taken care of. The 30th of July, the new animal rights group, Everyone Wants to Live, went into the biggest slaughterhouse for hens from the egg industry in Sweden. And there we documented inside the slaughterhouse and freed 4 hens who were driven to a loving home. The freed animals, unfortunately, can't write autobiographies like Frederick Douglass, but we can tell their stories about how they came from a life of pain and darkness and how they can blossom if they get the chance to grow up, to come to a loving home. One advantage we have today is that we have tools that can document these factory farms and slaughterhouses with photos and videos. Our group did a short video on the rescue and the documentation, and we actually had a privilege of showing it to some of you here yesterday in the cinema. It's not online yet, but hopefully within a week or so we will get it on our Facebook page that you can see here. Alla vill leva means everyone wants to live in Swedish. Now I want to turn our attention to the British suffragette movement in the early 1900s and the question of violence and militancy. The suffragette movement involved tens of thousands of brave women in the UK struggling to get the right to vote in public elections. They were organized in different organizations, some more mainstream and some more radical. They used a lot of different tactics, like peaceful demonstrations and civil disobedience. They chained themselves to railings, they held banners in the parliament, and often got arrested. When they hunger strike in the prisons, they got force feed, something, a torture that is difficult to imagine. Some of them got force fed no less than 200 times. When they demonstrated on the streets, sometimes they got sexually assaulted by police. And that experience probably radicalized many of these women in the movement. The movement's more militant wing, the WSPU, a Women's Social and Political Union, also used violent tactics, like burning down empty buildings, bombing various places, hitting politicians with dog whips, and at least using an axe of hurting politicians at one time. They didn't aim at taking lives, and there were no deaths on the other side when they used these methods. But a few politicians and a few police got hurt. This is a homemade bomb made by one of the suffragettes by a mustard container. At one time, they put a bomb in the very revered St. Paul's Cathedral in the UK. The bomb was filled with gunpowder, nuts and bolts. It was time to explode at midnight when there were supposedly no people in the church. However, the bomb was successfully found and diffused. But when the news came out about this bomb, it created a public outcry and fierce debate about these tactics from the militant women's movement. Perhaps you have heard about the radical flank effect. It's a sociological concept, important for us, I believe. It means that radical and confrontational actions can increase support for the issue and sometimes also support for more moderate organizations or groups. The public might say things like, I don't support the tactics of this militant organization, but I think the issue is important. In most, or perhaps all, successful movements, there has been a radical flank of some kind. And the British suffragette movement was very impressive and successful, but the question I wonder about is if they could have gotten the same kind of positive radical flank effect, perhaps a lot stronger even, if they had refrained from using violence and instead only stuck to radical but still non-violent tactics. And whether the suffragette movement was successful because or in spite of them using violence, that's still an ongoing debate for historians and political scientists. It's clear that hundreds of arsons and bombings they used gave a lot of publicity, and it pressured the government. But on the other hand, many experts point out that violence also alienated the public and hardened the opposition. Some politicians didn't want to give them the right to vote because that would be giving in to their violent tactics. This photo is from a front page of a British newspaper talking about an arson supposedly done by suffragettes. One can imagine that violence tactics could have done a lot more damage to the cause of women's right to vote if their arsons and bombings actually would have killed someone or maybe many people. And that is always a risk when you use these kind of tactics. Or how would the public would have viewed the movement in the issue if the bomb in the St. Paul's Cathedral, which many held to be one of the most revered buildings in the country, if that actually had gone off as planned? Of course, we will never know that exactly. One night in 1994 in Umeå, in the north of Sweden, 3 trucks at a slaughterhouse were set on fire with Molotov cocktails. Meat is Murder was sprayed on one of the trucks. This action is seen as the starting point of a more militant animal rights movement in Sweden. And since then, the media has talked about militant vegans as a threat towards society. Now, actually, there has been so few of these kind of actions lately, so they don't talk about militant vegans anymore. But they did really a lot back then. Also, a more personal example, I remember a former colleague saying that wherever she saw animal rights activists, maybe on the street with a sign or something, she always took the route on the other side of the road because she thought or feared that they would throw paint on her. I guess she had read about that or heard about it somewhere. But the last 20 years there have been very few violent actions when it comes to animal rights in Sweden. And even when they were at its peak, it was very few people who actually did it. It got a lot of publicity and raised the question, undoubtedly, about animal rights. But it also created a lot of fear among the public and negative views about veganism in the society. Personally, I don't see property destruction as violence. I have myself, in fact, took part in disarmament actions where we, in 2008, went into a Swedish weapon factory and hammered on rocket launchers, which were going to be sent to the Iraq War. Thank you. But one has to see that a fire and bombs is another thing, because then there is always a risk that someone will get hurt or die. And if you want to destroy parts of the animal exploitation apparatus, you can do that with safe tools like hammers and similar tools. And like with the suffragette movement, I wonder, and it would be nice to hear later what you think, if it wouldn't be best to aim for the radical flank effect by using radical nonviolence in different ways, rather than risk hurting someone else. By using peaceful civil disobedience, you show that you also risk being fined or even taken to prison, that you believe that much in your cause, so you're willing to do these things. You can, of course, also use nonviolence in ways that are not within the concept of civil disobedience, like here many film secretly at night and do important investigations of the animal exploitation in that way. I think that nonviolent actions have the advantages of the radical flank effect without the disadvantages of scaring people away with violence. A quite known book nowadays among activist circles is this one, Why Civil Resistance Works, The Strategic Logic of Nonviolent Conflict from 2011 by Erika Chenoweth and Maria Stefan. And there they explain that one reason why nonviolent movements are in general twice as successful as violent ones is that it can attract more people. And also more diverse people, like more women than the violent ones, elderly and professionals. And by being nonviolent, you also increase the chances of getting defectors on your side. Maybe there is a slaughterhouse worker that doesn't feel good about what he or she is doing. But if they see you as an enemy or as someone they should fear, then it's a lot harder for them to defect and maybe give you material of how their industry is doing inside. This book, I should say, has been criticized, saying that maybe it doesn't cover all kind of movements, but it's still interesting to do these comparisons, I find. Let's see. I believe that sometimes you can actually win short-term victories with violence. But for me, the choice of violence or non-violence is bigger than any one issue. It's about, for me, what kind of world we want to create. Do we want a world where the one with the biggest fist, the most powerful weapon, or the biggest army always wins? I will want to use methods that instead build a world where everyone can participate and do that in a peaceful, collaborative way. Now I want to turn to the environmental movement and the question of inclusivity. When I've joined blockades and other civil disobedience actions with the climate network Extinction Rebellion, no one has ever asked me how much CO2 I emit or if I own a gas-guzzling car or something like that. Here I am with my twin brother Christian at the blockade in Malmö. Can you tell if it's me on the left or the right? What do you think? Left? Yeah, that's right. Even without my beard. It's me on the left? Yes. The mainstream environmental movement has adopted a more inclusive, like big tent approach, welcoming also those who still live in ways that might hurt the environment, like driving a gasoline car or fly a lot. They have been more focused on structural change than individual change. And this seems to have been a successful strategy, since many feel that they can join the environmental movement. Although some more radical environment groups criticize the mainstream organizations when they, for example, accept funding from corporations who greenwash, and that is using environmentally friendly messages when they just go on polluting. From the bigger, more mainstream animal rights organizations, you're not required officially or unofficially to be a strict vegan. That's at least my understanding. Some of them have concepts like reducitarianism or campaigns like Meatless Monday that you see here, welcoming any reduction in animal consumption. But in general, I would say that the animal rights movement has chosen a more exclusive approach compared to the environmental movement. It would be nice to hear if you agree. And in many animal rights organizations or groups, you would not be looked upon kindly if it came out that you are not a vegan. And of course, the negative thing about this is it can hinder growth in our movement. If we would be more inclusive, one could feel more welcomed to be active for the animals without having first become vegan or vegetarian, and it might attract more people. But the question of how inclusive or exclusive you should be as an organization is unavoidable for any movement, and it can be really tricky to not fall in the extremes on either side. If you're too exclusive, you might risk becoming a sect, seen as strange with strict dogmas, and that everyone will follow by the letter. If you, on the other hand, are too inclusive, you might risk losing your principles and your goals if you compromise them to fit everyone. In the Swedish SAVE movement, we welcome vegans and non-vegans to our demonstrations at slaughterhouses. We feel that it's good that also non-vegans come and actually face the animals, and who will then be the meat that perhaps they eat in the transports. But at least up to now, the organizers we have in our movement and in the board, we are all vegans. But my feeling is that if we in the animal rights movement would be more inclusive, we would have a bigger chance of success, and accepting people as active before they become vegan or vegetarian. I think it's better for the animals to have more activists rather than more vegans. And having become part of the movement, there is a good chance, I believe, that they will become vegan sooner rather than later, at least if they continue to be active. But of course, it's also important to not dilute our values and not lose our visionary goals. We can make it easier to be an animal advocate and still be clear about our vision: a world without cages, without any animal exploitation. And now let us turn to the LGBTQ+ movement and the question of fair representation in TV and films. The TV series Friends from the 1990s is a favorite of mine, but the gay jokes and stereotypical view of homosexuality and also gender roles seems very outdated today. For example, Gandler's Gay Panic. But things have changed, I believe. Nowadays, LGBTQ+ characters often seen as normal and beloved in TV and films. Like, for instance, I think the character Will here in Will and Grace. And this change hasn't occurred by chance. It's because decades of activism from the LGBTQ+ movement, alongside, of course, also broader societal changes. One of the organizations that especially focused on gay and lesbian portrayals in media, TV, and film was GLAAD, formed in 1985 as Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. Now I believe it's just GLAAD, they're called. And the Los Angeles Times said about them, possibly one of the most successful organizations lobbying the media for inclusion. And as more LGBTQ+ writers, directors, producers, and actors gained prominence, they brought their own experiences and perspectives to the stories being told, leading to more authentic and diverse representation in TV and films. Now, vegans and animal advocates often portrayed negatively in today's TV and films, if they are shown at all. The character Todd in this film, Scott Pilgrim versus the World, is portrayed as arrogant and self-righteous vegan. Phoebe Buffay in Friends is sometimes portrayed as having a vegetarian or vegan diet, She's often seen as quirky or annoying. And in the TV series The Big Bang Theory, we get the message from Burnett's father that veganism is for people who are out of touch with, quotes, real food and also traditional values. And even though there are instances where vegans are seen as positive, or at least not stereotypically bad, we haven't reached a place where LGBTQ plus characters are today in TV and films. But I believe that if we are successful in general with changing public opinion when it comes to veganism and animal rights, like they try here at the outreach in Stockholm with Stockholm Animal Save, this will also influence popular culture like TV and radio and movies. But I think also we could learn from the LGBTQ plus movement and also try to influence more directly our representation in TV and films, which I don't think anyone have done. I haven't seen it, at least. Tell me afterward if I missed it. But there are, of course, organizations like PETA, who work with vegan celebrities to highlight their voices in the industry. And of course, I think that could be having an impact if they come out more as vegans and animal advocates. So that's also worth working for, I think. I also think that it would be great if we get more vegans and animal advocates in making TV and film, so we can be a part of shaping the stories that are told. And remembering, activism is not only standing with a sign somewhere with an animal rights message. It can also be writing a script or maybe directing a major film. During this short time, I've given you only a few examples. In the best scenario, I have maybe piqued your interest so that you might want to learn more about other movements and their tactics. Of course, we can watch documentaries and read books and follow different movements on their social media in real life. I can also highly recommend Sentience Institute. In their articles, they compare different movements and tactics much more thoroughly than I've been able to do at this talk. And you can go to their fundamental questions, and that's a good starting point if you want to read about different tactics and its pros and cons. And we can also be active in other movements, which works for a better world. I think it's healthy that we sometimes go out of our vegan bubble and see that there are indeed others that work for other important issues without letting go of the struggle for animals. Here is a picture I took last weekend at the demonstration in Göteborg, Sweden, with the climate movement Extinction Rebellion. When there are billions of exploited and killing of animals in horrible ways, and these atrocities seem to only grow, then it's easy to despair as an animal rights activist. When the culture and also the companies defending the animal exploitation industries are so overwhelmingly strong, we often think that it's hopeless and that we will never succeed in creating a world where we don't eat and use animals in other ways. But then it's important to realize that we need to escape the tyranny of now. That says the Swedish animal rights author Pelle Strindlund, who also happened to be a friend of mine. He says also, we seem to think that what is now is the normal and natural order. But then he also points out that in Sweden in the 1950s, 95% of all Swedish mothers spanked their children, 95%. But today, after decades of struggle for children's rights, hitting children is almost unthinkable for almost all, and in fact it's illegal in Sweden like in many other countries. And Stringlund says, history teaches us that moral norms can change radically. And if I could choose just one lesson from all the other movements in our history and their successes and failures, it would be this one. Major positive change is indeed possible. Each of the movements we discussed faced seemingly insurmountable odds. Few believed that slavery would be banned. Few believed that women would get the vote. And few certainly believed that a woman could marry a woman. Yet these movements persevered and achieved remarkable successes. Our cause, extending compassion and rights to all sentient beings, is no less achievable. That's my firm belief. As you have guessed, I believe it's worthwhile to critically think about what tactics and strategies that we use so we can achieve our goals better. But I also think that it's good not to be paralyzed because we haven't found an ideal tactic or strategy. One thing we can be sure of in today's world is if we don't do anything, there will be absolutely no progress. In fact, the situation will probably even get worse because the powerful forces that want to defend the animal exploitation industry, they will continue getting stronger if we don't do anything. So let us learn from others for some time and then go out and struggle together for animal liberation to the best of our abilities. Thank you.
All right, we've got time for one or two quick questions.
Hi, great talk. I was here last year as well, and I was like, yes, I'm seeing him again. So I really liked what you spoke about exclusivity and inclusivity in our movement. And with some other movements that I'm in, it's always a question, like, do we buddy up with people that have views that might even seem morally or politically inconsistent with what we believe in our movement just to advance, or do we become exclusive? And I've seen that a lot with other movements. I found it very difficult because, I mean, if it's morally and politically inconsistent with what I would deem as vegan, do we be inclusive anyway, so long as we all agree to advance animal rights? I'm a bit stuck. Although I agree with what you said, I'm a bit stuck. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I didn't get everything you said, but it's really a tricky question. I was also thinking in the organizations where I'm active, what kind of messages do we put out? Are they really inclusive or exclusive? And I guess I found out that maybe we're not as inclusive in our messages that I would like us to be. To actually say that everyone is welcome, and not just point to how important it is to be vegan, and I think just to thinking about it could help at least, and trying, try, and also when you maybe hear if someone comes and is not vegan, how you approach that person. If they feel welcomed, it's of course a bigger chance that they will come again, instead of being like frowned upon or So, but cool. It's a tricky one.
We've got one online, I think, and then do we have one online? Yeah, and this might have to be the last one.
All right, Carl from the online audience asks, hi Martin, if we are to expose the rights violations in the animal agriculture industry, not occasionally, but often, is there a risk that we desensitize the general non-vegan public to the animal use? Are there any studies or surveys that are showing the effect this footage has on the non-vegan public?
Sorry, I didn't get everything. Can you take it again?
If we are to expose the rights violations to the in the animal agriculture industry, not occasionally but often, is there risk that we desensitize the general non-vegan public to the animal use?
Yeah, maybe, but I think the problem we have as animal rights activists, we see a lot of footage, a lot of TV and so on of these atrocities, but the public, I don't think, see a lot of it. I actually spoke to my mother. I mean, I've been an animal rights activist now for a long time. She became vegetarian, and that's a big step for her in the last couple of years. But when I showed her the footage, you saw one picture from this pig farm, and I said how many piglets are born every year at that farm. It was, I think, 31,000 piglets. She was like, how is this possible? When I was a child, a farm was like a few animals. So, I mean, the public, even my mother, who should know more than most, are so unaware of what's happening. So, yeah, I guess it could be a problem, but not today, I think. I think we need much more material to get out there. Yeah.
I think that's all we have time for, so round of applause for Martin.
Thank you so much. I will be here during the rest of the conference. Feel free to come up to me, and I would love to hear more about your views on this. Thank you.